Good morning. I'd like to call to order the December 14th, 2022 Clackamas County Board of Commissioners Land Use Hearing. Commissioner Savas, can you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good morning, everyone. We are holding this meeting in person and virtually. Today, we will consider ZO 354-22-CP and ZO 356-22-ZAP, applications by Joanne Shaber on property approximately 14.5 acres in size and located near 14781 South Buckner Creek Road, approximately 1 mile northeast of the unincorporated community of Malino. The application involves a comprehensive plan amendment to change the applicable designation of the property from agriculture to forest and a corresponding zone change from exclusive farm use to either timber or ag forest. Public testimony will be taken this morning, and as always, the public is welcome to sign up to testify. Those wishing to testify this morning will be called on to provide your testimony at the appropriate time. When you are called on, be sure to include your name and the area where you live. I would like to remind all participants, including staff, all elected officials, and members of the public, that Robert's Rules of Order will be enforced in this hearing. We welcome your opinions and look forward to your polite participation. The hearing this morning will proceed as follows. We will first hear a short presentation from Principal Planner Martha Fritzie. Next, Jerry Murphy will provide testimony on behalf of the county's Planning Commission. Then I will open the hearing for public testimony, beginning with the applicant, who will have up to 15 minutes to present. Next, any public officials who wish to testify will have 3 minutes each. Then representatives from recognized community planning organizations and agencies will have 3 minutes each. Finally, others wishing to testify will have 3 minutes each. The board will then deliberate and either render a decision today or set a time to make a decision at a later date. Assisting us in the hearing today is our clerk, Tony Marinick, Planner Martha Fritzie, and Assistant Counsel Nate Boderman. We will now begin the hearing with a legal statement by Nate Boderman.
Good morning, everyone. This is a state-mandated disclosure here, so bear with me. Now's the time set for public hearing related to the previously identified land use applications. And this is a quasi-judicial land use hearing, which means two important things for those wishing to participate this morning. First, all the criteria that can be used in reaching a decision have been identified in the staff report. So testimonies, arguments, and evidence must be directed towards the criteria identified in the staff report or other relevant criteria found in the comprehensive plan or other land use regulations that the people or that the individual believes applies to this decision. Accordingly, anyone testifying is asked to please direct your testimony to a relevant approval criterion. Second, failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue may preclude appeal to the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals on that particular issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Once final, these decisions may be appealed to the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals. I'll ask at this time whether the Board of Commissioners, any individual on the commission, wishes to disclose any ex parte contacts, bias, or conflicts of interest. Not seeing any.
No.
So if anyone wishes to challenge the impartiality of any particular commissioner, please clearly indicate your intention to do so in any written or oral testimony that you may provide. And that concludes the statement.
Okay, thank you. Martha, I think we're handing it over to you for an overview.
Thank you. I have a PowerPoint presentation coming up. Excellent. So good morning, Commissioners. I am Martha Fritzie with the county's Planning and Zoning Division, and I am going to give you the highlights of the application that is before you today for consideration. As mentioned by Commissioner Schrader, this application is for both a comprehensive plan designation and a zoning change. The comprehensive plan designation would change from agriculture to forest, with a corresponding zoning designation change from EFU, exclusive farm use, to either timber or ag forest. And the reason it's either timber or ag forest is that both of those zoning districts implement the forest plan designation. And so if we decide that the forest designation is the most appropriate for this particular property, you then have a choice of which one of those two zoning designations to apply to it. And I'll discuss that a little bit more in the presentation. It's important to note that this comp plan zone change would not authorize any development. The applicant has stated in her materials that the ultimate goal would be to put one dwelling on the property if it were changed to a timber and ag forest zone. To do so would require an additional land use application called a forest template test, and that would happen at some point in time in the future. So it's not even a guarantee. This application would simply change the underlying zoning designation of the property. It's not authorizing development. I just wanted to make that very clear. The site is about a mile northeast of the community of Malino. It's a single tax lot, sort of a teardrop-y type shape, and it's approximately 14.85 acres. Surrounding zoning is all what we call natural resource zoning. It's farm and forest zoning. Immediately east of the property is the timber zone, and includes some larger parcels that are owned by a timber company and in active timber production. The green area immediately to the south is ag forest, which is sort of a mixed farm forest zone, and then west and north of the property is more exclusive farm use zoning. This is an aerial photo, a recent aerial photo of the subject property. You can see that it's largely forested, and the immediate area surrounding it is largely forested. There's definitely some farming activity to the west of the property, and there are scattered rural residences among the farm and forest properties around it. The property itself contains no structures. It does have a small cleared area that the applicant said has recently been logged. The rest of the property is forested. It contains some steep slopes. It's been characterized as relatively rough terrain by the traffic engineers. There are no protected resources on this property in terms of streams and floodplain, things like that. There is, however, two what the applicant identified as spring-fed streams that do show up on the statewide wetland inventory, and we'll discuss the implications of that in just a minute too. The mapped soils on the property are Class 4 and Class 6 soils. In terms of farmland, this makes it considered low-value farmland. In terms of forest land, it actually has a pretty high capability for tree and timber production. So just so you know, notice was sent of this application in October per state and the comprehensive plan regulations. The only comment that we received since then was from the Department of State Lands. We notified them because of this identified wetland, and they sent a comment that's in your packet that they were not expecting any impacts to the wetland on site. The CPOs, the Hamlin Malino, we did not receive any comments from them. So this will make your eyes roll back in your head. Of course, with the comp plan zone change, there are a lot of criteria that need to be met. I am not going to go into detail about every single one of these. If you go into your packet to the Planning Commission staff report, there are findings that address each one, each relevant criteria. But there are a lot, and I'm going to go through them sort of in the context of the four main criteria for a zone change, because that really ties all of the other pieces together. And so when you're looking at a potential zone change, there are four main criteria identified in our zoning ordinance. The first being that it must be consistent with all the applicable goals and policies of comprehensive plan, which ties you back to a lot of those other criteria that were listed in the previous slide. That's sort of the meat of it today. You also must demonstrate that any needed public services are available. This property does not have access to, nor does it need any public services, and so that's a pretty easy criteria to meet. And then the last two deal with the transportation system, the safety and adequacy, and we'll address that also briefly. So first and foremost, we need to look at the comprehensive plan. Most of the chapters in the comprehensive plan aren't applicable, or they deal with procedural issues, and which, of course, were all followed in this case, and the transportation system adequacy, which I'll talk about in relation to those other zone change criteria. The main policies that we need to address for this particular application would be found in Chapter 3. There is a policy about wetlands specifically, and the policy is that outside, or essentially in the rural areas, it's this prevent disturbance of natural wetlands policy. This is a little bit general. It was adopted originally because the county didn't have a really good inventory of wetlands out in the rural area when we went through our Goal 5 planning process. And so this is sort of a catch-all. This is sort of a heads up, like if you are doing something, a big application like a zone change or a conditional use, you need to really think about the wetlands and notify the state and make sure that you are doing your best to prevent any disturbance of that. And so that's why the state was notified, or one of the reasons why the state was notified, the Department of State Lands. And I think it's reasonable based on the comments from DSL. I guess I should go to my next slide because there are the map wetlands that I'm talking about. I think it's reasonable based on the comments from DSL that there's no anticipated impacts to the wetland, and that any future development on the property, which of course would be minimal, this isn't a property that could be divided or anything like that. Any future development, I think it's easy to conclude that it would be able to avoid the streams that are noted on there as wetlands. And so this idea of prevent disturbance, I think, can easily be met. And just so you know, also any future development on the property would also, DSL would also need to be notified, and they would have the opportunity to comment on a specific development proposal here. So then we go on to Chapter 4, the land use chapter, and that is the chapter that really ties into statewide planning goals 3 and 4 for agriculture and forest. And that's the chapter that identifies the criteria and policies for designating agriculture land versus forest land. And this is intended to be just a general summary of the main criteria that you look at when you're trying to decide if a land is agriculture or forest. And these are essentially directly out of the statewide planning goals and the implementation of each of those. And so for agriculture, the criteria are things like predominantly class 1 through 4 soils, other lands suitable for farming, lands primarily in agricultural use, larger parcels that are necessary to permit farming and prevent conflicts on adjacent lands. Whereas for the forest designation, you look at existing and potential forest lands, lands that might be needed for protection of wildlife and fish habitat, lands generally in forest use, and then this one here that says predominantly capable of generating at least 85 cubic feet of timber per acre per year. And you might ask, how do we know that? And that is based on the soil types. So when you look at the aerial photos of the subject property, I pulled back as far as I could on Google Earth. And it's pretty clear that this property has not been in agricultural production, that it's been forested at least back through since 1994. In addition, the soils I mentioned are low-value soils in terms of agricultural production, but based on the soil types, the timber production is actually pretty high. Potential timber production is actually pretty high. The various soils have a potential of anywhere between 135 and 148 cubic feet per acre per year. And again, the threshold was 85, and so that well exceeds that. It's clear that the property is currently forested and has been for at least the last several decades, and it does actually include some pretty steep terrain and even these stream wetland areas that would benefit from some protection. And so staff finds that the subject site really meets the criteria for a forest plan designation rather than agriculture. And so once we determine that, we get to the zoning district, right? And I said there's 2 zoning designations that implement the forest designation, timber and ag forest. It's pretty simple in our comprehensive plan. The timber zoning district shall be applied to areas predominantly in forest use, the ag forest, into areas that have a mixture of agriculture and forest. And I think it's pretty clear just from the photos and the other evidence in the record that this really is a predominantly forested site, and so therefore the timber designation would be the most appropriate. And so I'm not going to talk about the public services criteria. The last two of those four main criteria for a zone change deal with the transportation system. And whenever you do a comp plan amendment and zone change, you have to do a traffic study. The applicant did provide one. And the traffic study needs to address Goal 12 and the transportation planning rule, which essentially makes you look at the potential traffic impacts of the proposed zone versus the existing zone. And in this case, the traffic study provided by the applicant showed that the change would probably result in a very small increase in traffic. It would not have a significant effect on the transportation system and would have a minimal impact on the operability and safety of the surrounding system. And so that really addresses the two main traffic criteria under the ZDO. And the transportation engineering staff has taken a look at the traffic study and does concur with the conclusions. An email from transportation engineering is also included as an exhibit in your packet. So to wrap it up, staff finds that the proposal does meet all the applicable criteria for a forest designation. It meets all the applicable criteria for a timber zoning designation, and staff recommends approval of these two files, subject to the recommended conditions of approval. Honestly, the conditions of approval really are directing staff to change the maps. It's not anything that the applicant has to do, but they are listed in your packet. And then finally, there was a public hearing on November 14th before the Planning Commission. There was no testimony provided at that hearing, aside from the applicant. A neighbor did speak, but didn't really provide testimony toward this particular application. They were just noted that they were new to the area and were interested to find out what was going on. The Planning Commission also is recommending approval of these two files. It was a unanimous vote, and really very little discussion and no significant issues came up at the Planning Commission hearing. And that's the end of my presentation. I just want to throw one extra thing out there because it's not in your script, Commissioner Schrader. The chair of the Planning Commission is here today, and we are trying out this idea of having a member of the Planning Commission come and represent the Planning Commission's recommendation to the board at your land use hearings. And so we will be doing that today, and hopefully you'll see this more in the future. And we're trying to increase communication between the Planning Commission and the board and have them be able to answer your specific questions about things that may have happened at the hearing.
So my question to that, colleagues, before I open up for questions, then would our chair of the Planning Commission, would that be under the public officials? Or would it be representatives from CPOs or agencies? Nate, maybe you could tell me.
I would just recommend that we do that as part of staff's presentation. Obviously not staff, but it is the position of staff and other related affiliations, right?
Okay.
Presenting the official
All right.
position of.
Well, first, let me open it up, colleagues. Rarely do we have something that seems so straightforward in land use. Do you have any questions?
I have one.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you
Mr.
for the
Shaw.
briefing. I've read the documentation, I've seen the aerial photograph. I can see that the property is more conducive to forest than agricultural use. Therefore, I support the zoning change. My question is there a benefit to the property owner of TBR or AGF? Would he gain by either one of those? And does the property owner have a preference?
So I believe the property owner is here and maybe could answer that in her testimony if she chooses to testify. In terms of the preference, I can say that the application was, the first request was for the timber zoning district, but the way our form is, it has a little spot for if you can't get that, is there an alternative? And that's where ag forest was, so I would presume that timber is the preference.
Okay.
And then in terms of differences, yes, I mean, there are some different uses allowed in ag forest versus the timber zone. And so for
Yes.
the stated purpose that the applicant has for this application, there isn't a significant difference.
Okay. So that the TBR zoning designation probably would be just fine.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, Commissioner Fisher, you have your light on.
Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
okay.
So just looking through all of the materials, and in Exhibit 1, it's a long exhibit, and I believe that's the application
Yes.
for the applicant. But I'm curious, because it's hard for me as sitting in this place to put everything in context. And so I followed along a lot of what the materials are to what your presentation was. But I'm curious why there are pictures of, looks like a residence from page 29 through, I mean, it just goes, it has those types of pictures. Could you explain why that's a part of this application when they're not looking at approving? This is just a land designation?
That
and
is
not-
what the applicant submitted, and the applicant is certainly welcome to submit anything they want with their application. It wasn't necessary for this application. She has been very upfront in stating that the primary reason that she wants the zoning changed is so she could get approved, potentially get approved for a dwelling. But, and I guess that is what the dwelling would potentially look like, but this application is not authorizing that dwelling.
Okay, so that part of the application that she submitted wasn't required,
Right.
it's just informative?
It's just additional information.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Commissioner Samus, do you have any questions? Well, then let's move on. I will now open public testimony on this item, beginning with the applicant. And Tony, you told me that the applicant is on Zoom and would like to testify.
Ms. Schraber, if you'd like to testify, now is your opportunity.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Happy holidays. I guess my
Good morning.
my camera isn't on. I don't know what else really to add that Martha hasn't covered in great detail. Yes, the purpose is that I would like to build a home on this amazing piece of property. My intent is to be a completely off-grid sustainable home with 100% off-grid solar panels, a well, and a septic system. So there won't be any impact to any services that I would need. It's it is a timbers. It should be in timber zoning. There's really no way you could farm on this with the lay of the land. And and again, my purpose in doing all this and spending time with you guys is that I may have the opportunity to build a home in that zoning, where the previous zoning, there would be no way that I could build a home because there's no way I could produce a farm income on that land. So that's pretty much the purpose and the reason that I'm doing all of this. And I'm not really sure. If you have any questions, let me know.
Are there any questions, colleagues? Thank you for testifying. Yes, Commissioner Fisher.
Yeah, I'm looking for the first page. Oh, I got it here. The applicant. So, Joni, you are the applicant, but the owner of the property is Carla?
It's Kayla.
Kayla, sorry. I don't know how that all works, but maybe that's more of a question for Martha, is how, I don't know who, it looks like she doesn't own the property, so how is she the applicant? How does that work?
So anyone can be an applicant, but the property owner has to sign the application and authorize the application. And so it's sort of like she's the contact person that we're working with, but the property owner has signed and authorized this.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. No, any other questions, colleagues? Yes? Oh, no. All right. You shut off the slide, Jim.
I think there was a sequence, and there was an expectation that Mr. Murphy would speak
Yeah,
on
I was-
behalf of the Planning Commission, so.
I was going to call him up next, yeah. You bet. So, Mr. Murphy, welcome. Come on up, testify. I am putting you right after the applicant. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Morning, Chair, Commissioners. Thank you for having me. Like I said, or Martha has described, this is a pilot program that we discussed at the dinners to bring the true feelings of what happened with the Planning Commission. We take this quite serious. You know, we're in appointed positions, and we love doing the homework, I guess. So, you know, there's many hours invested in what we do. And this particular item that was delivered to us seems quite simple, but we still do the homework. We still want to dig through what ORSs, OARs that address this. And I have to say the planning department is so efficient that it makes it so easy for us to do this. So we are very pleased to be able to work with such experienced planners. But anyway, Principal Planner Martha gave a very detailed explanation and narrative of the applications brought to the Planning Commission, the description of the current zoning and soil classifications, along with the description of the terrain, brought a clear picture to the Planning Commission of what the property looks like. With a pre-app summary of the property is capable of producing between 138 to 145 cubic feet of fiber per year. Soils are low class for farming, 4 to 6, class 4 to class 6. That's pretty low and ideal for timber production. The area is, in general, already in timber. So it's on the fringes of what would be farmland. If you were on a flat farmland pretty much anywhere in Oregon, and as you start to climb up a hillside, you'll be in timber. And that's what this property looks like. So it's elevated off of a farmland base. So questions were, was there a template test done for this particular property? And yes, there was a feasibility study done, a feasibility forest template test dwelling to see if it was worth pursuing this. And so they've already pursued that particular avenue to see if they should make this move, because this is not this is a fairly expensive process to do a zone change. And so far, it looks good. So they still will have to go through with another forest template test. And what template test was used? Clackamas County has one of the strictest tests in the state. Did they use the state test, or did they use Clackamas County's test that they've been adhering to over the years? Principal Planner Martha said it was the Clackamas County's test. I think that was backed up with by Jennifer Hughes also. So this test is something that's the Planning Commission wants to hang on to. We look at this as taking pride in how our county looks and operates. Small farms, family farms throughout our county, I think there's 3,000 of them, produce a considerable amount of income. And this is something that we need to hang on to. A recent CPO meeting that I had attended that was through Beaver Creek, they had a guest speaker that said farmland or farm products exchange hands 20 times from the ground to the final customer. So that's quite a business that's involved with these small farms. She said store-bought products might be only change hands 2 or 3 times. So this is something that employs our people of our county. So we take this quite serious when it's delivered to us if we're going to change farmland to timberland. So that question was asked and answered. Question asked about a sentence in response to a request to a forest template feasibility mapping, and that was from Senior Planner Joy Fields in response, was referring to state law that says that this should not be a pathway to actually building a residence on farmland. You should not be taking this route. You have to go through a whole procedure. This is probably the easiest route to take. To build from farmland, you have to have a minimum of 80 acres or so and be producing for 2 years productively and have to show a profit of that to actually build a home on it, if I remember right. So that answer came forward. That was important to us. The property is currently zoned EFU, and forest template test dwelling is not a path. Okay, that's what I just went over. Okay, is the property land locked? And that was the question asked. It looks like on that map, it does not have an easement to it. It looks like there was a temporary easement put in, and I think the owner had explained, yes, there was a temporary easement put in to access logging activity at one time. They had to cross a creek. They put in a culvert. You can't really see it. It's grown over with debris. So that would probably have to be updated and applied for. What is the process to qualify for a dwelling on EFU? The farm must be productive. Timber production on timber zoning not require production. I should probably put on my glasses, probably help. Timber production on timber zoning does not require production. So you don't have to prove that you have a profitable timber stand in 2 years. So, you know, it may take 50 years to actually come up and have a profit with your timber. And that makes that a shorter pathway for an owner, property owner, to do a zone change and then build a property. So this is something that we took notice of. Is the property zoned by mistake? That was a question asked by one of our planning commissioners. It looks like it was zoned for farming, but no one's ever farmed on it. This landowner came forward and said the previous owner used to raise cattle on it for 50 years. So that's what the farming activity was. Does changing the zone pass a template test make it easier for neighbors to do the same thing? So that was something that I wanted to ask. Is this opening a pathway for other neighbors to do the same thing that this person is doing? And no, it doesn't. They'll have to go through the strict rules that we have. Are the streams fish-bearing? Being a member of the Watershed Council in the past, this is something that I want to ask. And yeah, what is the value of these streams? They are not fish-bearing according to the Department of State Lands. How long have you owned the property? Now, she's only owned the property, I think, since 2018, it sounded like. So, fairly recent owner. And that's the questions that were asked by the Planning Commission. And we had the same feelings that the Planning Department had also, that this should pass. She's done her homework. She wasn't hiding anything. That's why she had the house plans. You know, this is what I want to build. And I think this was a very thorough done application. She put a lot of time in it, and I think it was well done.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming. I think this is a great idea to actually have the chair of the Planning Commission or other Planning Commission members come and give us a thumbnail sketch of what your thoughts were as you were running through this. I know numerous times in the past, I wish we had somebody here because you want to know what the thought process was. So I want to open it up. Colleagues, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions, but I got a comment.
All righty.
I'd like to thank the Planning Commission for coming here today. That was very informative and very helpful. Nate Boderman and Martha, that was an outstanding briefing. I appreciate it. Joan Shaber, are you still there? She's still there? Okay, okay. I just want to say thanks for working with our planning department, and best of luck to you in seeing your dream come true on this property. When you get out there and look at planting trees, think about planting a few coastal redwoods. When the wind blows hard, the coastal redwoods make no noise, whereas the fir trees right next to them will be hissing. I've planted them on my house some 25 years ago, and they're 75 feet tall already. So best of luck, and thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you for coming today. So as I go through this script, I need to ask a few questions. Are there any other public officials that wish to testify? Okay, thank you so much for coming. Are there any representatives from any CPOs or agencies that wish to testify? Are there any members of the public that wish to testify at this point? And Tony, is there anybody on Zoom?
There is not, Madam Chair.
Or on the phone? Okay. Well, okay. So this is the end of my list, so I will now officially close the public testimony. So colleagues, I don't know if you want to have any last deliberation with this or move right to a motion.
I'm ready for a motion.
Okay.
I was hoping we extend this for another 2 or 3 hours,
Oh,
but
really?
really, I mean, staff did do a great job, so I
Thank you,
appreciate that.
yeah.
I appreciate the concise and clear messaging and the chair of the planning commission attending. Thank
Yeah.
you. That helps, and also the applicant. So Chair, if you're all right, I'm happy to make a motion.
All righty, let's go for it.
I move we approve Z0354-22-CP and Z0356-22-ZAP as recommended by staff and the county's planning commission.
Seconded.
All righty, so it has been moved by Commissioner Savas and seconded by Commissioner Scholl. Colleagues, is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Tony, can you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Fisher,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl,
Aye.
Vice Chair Schrader.
Aye, the motion is approved 4-0. Okay, now that the application has been approved, I will direct staff to draft an order reflecting the decision and include it on the agenda for this board's adoption at a future business meeting. All righty, at this point, ladies and gentlemen, I think this has been the quickest land use conversation I've had in a long time. We are adjourned.